tree.
Bandwidth is low.
And he's planted it against the garden
What does that mean? Anything
wall.
or nothing?
It shot up like a rocket till it's nearly reached the sky. It's the
biggest
astonishing in the world.
Well, let's all get
We
going.
couldn't see the top of it. It got so blooming high. It's the biggest astonishing in the world. When father's had a snootful at his pub.
Right.
Oh, I think you're great doing that, Linda. I think you're great.
All right then. Right. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
We all okay?
Uh-huh.
One thing I was disappointed about this week. I took off my tiny little figs.
Oh.
Yeah, a bit disappointing because they're never going to make it. So I thought I would remove
I think
them.
it'll be all right now.
Yeah, but I could supply a supermarket with all the ones I've got. Has anybody retrained to be a lorry driver yet?
Not yet.
They're offering a lot of money out there, lots of incentives. So anybody want to come out of retirement?
I don't think we'll pass the test.
Nah, no problem. Right, so yes, so we're all here today for a talk on the astounding flora of Australia, and today's talk has been sponsored by the Catsfield and District Garden Club, so thank you very much to them. So I always like to warm you up with a quiz question. So today's question is, where does this plant originate from? Do you recognize it? Do you need a clue? Wave at the screen if you need a clue. Okay, I'll give you a clue. Does that help? So it's a Torbay palm, or sometimes called a Cornish cabbage palm. So, and before anybody guesses, it's not from Cornwall. I'll give you that one for free. So we'll have the answers at the end, but we'll see if anybody can guess. Right then, so just a couple of bits and bobs from myself. It'd be great if we could get all you guys to spread the word about tender shoots. We're now trying to put the program on for 2022. We've had a fantastic schedule for this year. I think by the end of this year, we'll have had about 40 talks in total, which is just incredible. So a lot of people have, really enjoyed those, and it all works by you guys contributing to those talks, putting the talks on for us. So if you can get hold of people who can do talks for us and get other clubs, other individuals involved, that would be fantastic, because it'd be nice to be able to continue with these for next year. We have got a reps meeting on the 29th of September. So this is basically where all the clubs who are involved with tender shoots, we get together once a month and talk about the program and the plan. So if anybody wants to get involved with that, drop us an email or give us a call on the telephone number. Now, is anybody planting autumn bulbs? Just wave at the screen if you are. Yeah, fantastic. Now, have you seen probably Monty on TV and other people say, if you're planting them, throw them up in the air and just plant them when they land? Have you seen them do that? Yeah, is anybody planning on doing that, or have you done that in the past? Wave at the screen. No, oh, a few of you, yes. Okay, good. Now, quite a lot of people talk about, squirrels or voles or whatever digging up those bulbs. Now, if you want to get a dog to follow a scent trail, what do? You get the scent, you rub it everywhere where you want the dog to follow, and obviously the dog follows it. So when you throw these bulbs up in the air and they land everywhere, all the bits of the skin land in various places on the ground, what does it do? It just spreads the scent everywhere. So it tells every mammal that's around where you've planted these bulbs, so they come and dig them up. So my advice to you is don't do that. Don't throw them everywhere. I'm going to share with you a plant of the moment. This is something that I've got growing in the garden. And it is fantastic. Lilium Speciosum. Does anybody recognize that one? Wave at the screen if you recognize it. Oh, you do recognize it. Brilliant. Fantastic. For those who don't, it's a very late flowering lily. Most of the lilies I have usually are sort of done by July. This one is right at the end of August and all the way through to September. Now, it's got a very, very subtle scent. And in the garden, you might think there's just nothing special about it. It's got reasonably small flowers, but it's a very late flowering. But if you cut these flowers and you bring them indoors, when the sun shines through the window and you get a little bit of heat, the scent on it is absolutely intoxicating. It is absolutely stunning, much sweeter than a normal summer lily. Some of the summer lilies can be quite sickly, the scent, but this one is absolutely brilliant. So I definitely recommend you get hold of this. The one that I grow is rubrum, but you can get also one called Euclida. So have a look for those. If you want to find them in the garden centre, you can usually find them in packets like that from Taylor's Bulbs. So keep a lookout for those. They are absolutely incredible. I would really highly recommend you give those a go if you haven't tried them before. Right then, so I'm now going to introduce Glenn. So Glenn lives in Ferrum, Hampshire. He's also the chairman of the Catsfield and District Garden Club. Glenn joined the Royal Navy in 1965 and served for 28 years. He retired in 1993 as a lieutenant commander, and serving on the ships, he visited well over 50 countries and became incredibly interested in ornithology, photographing birds in every country it visited. He's also now a fellow of the Zoological Society of London. He gives various talks to various organisations, including the RSPB, schools, history societies, and so forth. And he has visited plenty of places around the world. He's visited quite a few places with his wife as well. And I was going to put a list of the countries he's visited, but then I think we probably would have run out of time this evening if I'd gone through all of those, because he's pretty much been to every country you can think of. So he's very well travelled. And give him a warm welcome.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to you all. As Indy was saying, I'm chairman of Catsfield and District Gardening Club. We've just celebrated our 60th anniversary, and that's been very, very busy. But I have presented this, the Astounding Flora of Australia, on a couple of occasions, and it's always been very well received, mainly because Australia is such a fascinating place, and it's full of the most astounding flora you could ever see. It's really amazing. So as Indy indicated there, I'm going to take you 10,000 miles away or thereabouts to illustrate some of these fabulous plants. And I've been to Australia about 3 or 4 times. The first time was when I was in the aircraft carrier HMS Invincible, and we paid a visit there, and I'll explain a little bit more about it in a moment. Just before I do that, I think a lot of people think that the bottle brush that you see on the screen there is the national flower of Australia. In fact, it's not. It's the golden wattle, and the golden wattle was chosen by the Australians because it represents the colours of the country, and also it means sort of togetherness. Now, you can't say that their flora is anywhere near together because they have over 34,000 different plants, with a huge amount of fungi and over 3,000 lichens. So let's have a look at some of them this evening. Before I do that, there's the ship entering Sydney Harbour, one of the most iconic scenes that you'll see anywhere in the world. I've had the honour of actually entering, I think, 2 of the most beautiful ports in the world. That's Sydney, and the other one is Rio de Janeiro. In fact, we entered Rio de Janeiro a couple of times. One, because we brought somebody who was very ill, and we came in early under the cover of darkness, and then we came out again and came in properly. So there's a sort of an unusual occurrence. But back to the plants, the important factors that we've got to take into consideration when we talk about Australia is why has it developed the flora that it has. Well, first of all, it's a large landmass. It's almost 3 million square miles, and it's the largest island in the world. It's got a mega diverse country. Its size means that it's a wide variety of landscapes. It's in fact the oldest, flattest, driest inhabited continent in the world, with the least fertile shores. Quite an amazing fact, really. It's surrounded, as I said, it's an island, largest island in the world, by the Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean, and it's separated from Asia by several different seas. And the Queensland coast and the Tasman Sea lie between Australia and New Zealand. What I want to show you is that the tropical rainforest in the northeast of the country has a mountain range that extends southwards, southwest and east, and there's deserts in the centre. So it's just half of it is about of Australia is located within the Tropic of Capricorn, and the line that you see at the top there, which I just illustrate for you, that's the equator there. So a lot of Australia, about half of it, is located within the tropics. Also worth stating, and this tends to get forgotten, is just how big it is. I mean, I said 3 million square miles, but the distances that have to be travelled by Australians are incredible. And of course, they use the airplane a lot. But just to remind you, I mean, I live in Fareham, down on the south coast, and to go to John O'Groats, 720 miles, and it will take you about 12.5 hours to complete that journey. I'm going to show you some of the distances in Australia. If you're going from Adelaide to Darwin, so Adelaide in the south there to Darwin in the north, it's 1,600 miles. If you're going from Perth to Brisbane, so Perth on the west side of Australia to Brisbane on the east coast, 2,500 miles. If you're going from Perth to Bamiga, and you might say, well, where is Bamiga? Well, it's right on the top of the northernmost point of Australia, and it's 3,500 miles. And then Melbourne to Bamiga. Melbourne is down in the south, just pointed out for you. Whoops, where's my laser gone? Melbourne down here, and this is the heavily populated part of Australia, right up to Bamiga there. That's 4,876 miles. And I'll illustrate that for you there. And as you can see, the route goes right along the coast there. To give you some idea about that in relation to us, Bamiga to Perth is the same as us travelling to somewhere like London to Tehran. So you can understand the difference between, you know, what flora that you would find between here and Tehran. Quite a lot of differences. And that's what Australia has within its boundaries. It has several climatic areas, a vast area generally called the outback, which is a desert. Less than 200 millimeters of rain a year. That's about 8 inches. That's shown in the claret coloration there, and the blue line is semi-desert. You have somewhere between 8 and 16 inches a year. The tropical climate, and as I've just illustrated really far north there, has a dry season, May to October, and what they call a muggy season, November to April. And the rainfall in that area is anywhere between sort of 16 inches and 47 inches. There's a lot of thunderstorms, and the area is susceptible to hurricanes. When my wife and I were last in Australia, we were visiting just north of Cairns, and the locals were saying, oh, it's very windy and we're boarding up the windows and things. And we thought to ourselves, well, it was just a sort of windy day in the UK, and what were they going on about? But when we got back to the hotel was also boarding up all the windows and putting all of the furniture into the swimming pool with the water to make sure that it wouldn't blow away. But we weren't put off by this, and we decided to go and have a meal at a local restaurant that we'd used previously. When we got outside, it was very windy indeed, and we got a bit concerned as we headed down the road when we actually saw that small trees were taking off, and we quickened our step and we saw even larger trees starting to take off, and it was almost as if God had pulled a lever when suddenly all hell broke loose, and the full force of the hurricane came down on us, or at least we thought it was the full force of it. We rushed back to the hotel, but actually the center of the storm passed about 20 miles south of us, and it devastated a town there. Such was the wind and the rain that came with it. So I've had a unique experience a hurricane on land, and whilst I was serving in HMS Kent, the Admiralty thought it was a good idea for the ship, a British warship, to go through the eye of the storm when we were on our way back from Japan. And I think the idea was to see what effect it had on the warship. Well, I can tell you what effect it had. We were 3 months in dockyard hands back in Singapore, the subject of the damage. And for me personally, I still have the nightmares. It was like being at Alton Towers, all the rides at once. So I've had the unique experience of being in a hurricane, both on land and at sea. The driest parts of the area that I've just shown you there has a lack of vegetation, savanna type vegetation, whereas nearer the coast, you'll get rainforest type conditions, and more about that later. So Australia's climatic zones continued. It's worth just knowing all of this background because it helps you understand why the flora developed in the way that it did. The first one I'm showing you here is the southeast. Here the temperature is pretty constant throughout the year, except in the mountainous regions in the extreme southeast. But it has a very nice climate usually, with warm summers and cooler winters. Interestingly, the last two areas, which are located on the coast here, there are two southern areas where they have a Mediterranean mild climate, rainy winters, warm summers, but sometimes because they're so close to the interior of Australia with all the deserts, they get very high temperatures indeed, and exceeding 40 degrees at times. So this next slide illustrates all of the different conditions that you will find in Australia. we've got everything from deserts, mountains, savanna, salt pans, rainforests, rich arable land, and very poor dry land. So the variations are absolutely enormous. Excuse me a minute. I'm just going to adjust that. Thank you. Right. Okay. So in order to give you some idea of the different flowers that are in Australia, and as I say, there's a huge number of them, I'll go through the state flowers of Australia. This gives you some idea of the differences. Starting off with the state flower of Australia, the capital is the royal bluebell. So there it is, illustrated there. It's floral emblem of the Australian Capital Territory, as I said, native to the region, found in subalpine woodland. Next one is the Waratah, the state flower of New South Wales. It's a member of the Proteaceae family, widespread, but in sort of isolated pockets, really, found in mountains areas, and it's a shrub that can grow up to 13 feet tall. So it's a very beautiful flower indeed. Very often gets confused with the Protea from South Africa. More about that later. I'll be explaining the difference there. The next flower is the state flower of the Northern Territory. This is Sturtz Desert Rose. Now it's described as a desert rose, but actually it's not a desert rose at all. It's what would you say? A member of the hibiscus family. So rose is actually incorrect. Found on stony or rocky slopes, in dry creek beds around Alice Springs, and in the southern part of the Northern Territory. So the next flower for state is the Cookstown Orchid, state flower of Queensland. Found in northern Queensland, it grows in exposed situations, usually has somewhere between 3 and 20 flowering canes, and a very beautiful flower indeed. This is an interesting one. It is the state flower of South Australia, and it's called Sturtz Desert Pea. A lot of the flowers are named after Stuart, who was an early Australian explorer, exploring the interior of the country. Sturtz Desert Pea, state flower of South Australia, slow growing creeping plant with stems and leaves appearing soft grey because of a fine covering of fine hairs. The flower, like a lot in the interior of Australia, stands upright on fleshy stalks. My next state flower is a very unusual one indeed. It's the red and green kangaroo paw, state flower of Western Australia. They display beautifully between August and November, stand remarkably tall, and it's a very desirable cut flower, possessing an unusual form, as I'm sure you'll agree, with striking colours, and it lasts well when it's been cut. Probably an unusual choice is the Tasmanian state flower, which is the blue gum. So the blue gum is a tall evergreen tree. It's endemic to Tasmania, has mostly a smooth bark, and has these delicate little flowers. And the Victorian state flower is a fairly common flower, the pink common heath, found on heathlands and shrublands, and also in open forest, a small shrub growing up to about 3 feet in tall. Highly regarded by gardeners, there's over 70 cultivars have been developed of this, but it's actually caused quite a lot of problems because most of those cultivars vanish after a very short time. So although highly regarded by gardeners, it's not an easy plant to propagate reliably, which has actually limited its use in horticulture and revegetation. There are 34 World Heritage Biodiversity sites, and they're shown on this slide here in red. And Australia has one of them, which is in Western Australia. What do we mean by a biodiversity hotspot? Well, it must have at least 1,500 plants which are endemic to the area. And it must have a high percentage of the plant life which is found nowhere else on the planet. In other words, it's irreplaceable. The other caveat it has to have is that it must have 30% or less of its original natural vegetation left. In other words, it must be under threat. So Western Australia is one of those biodiversity hotspots in the world, but Australia has also created its own, and those biodiversity hotspots are shown here. So they've broken Western Australia down into 8 distinct hotspots, which are listed in yellow here, and in addition listed a further 7 hotspots found throughout Australia, and you can see them shaded in blue on the map there. So now I'm going to look at the main species that you find in Australia. You would be understanding that acacias would be one of the main species. These are, in other words, wattles, what the Australians call wattles. We've got eucalyptus, eucalypts, the proteaceas, the melaleucas, wildflowers, hemodrachias, eremophilias, and the orchids. So they are the main species, and we're going to run through them for you. So acacias, wattles, they are commonly known as wattles in Australia. Large number of shrubs and trees in this family. Australia boasts more than 1,200 species of acacia, and this is a typical acacia tree. This actually, as you can see, is used on the floral emblems of various state insignia. They're well spread, found around Canberra, southern New South Wales, and in the Adelaide Hills into Victoria. Acacias are very successful because they've got a lot of fire resistance, which has been developed over millions of years. Wattles are held in very high regard in Australia, and they even have a wattle day on the 1st of September each year to celebrate wattles. The western male of Western Australia, which is a wattle, is known to live for about 250 years in quite difficult circumstances, as you can see there. Most wattles are this golden yellow colour or shades of yellow, but There's a typical, that's blaze wattle, typical colour. But one wattle in northern Queensland has a mauve pink flower, and another one in Western Australia has been discovered is white. In Victoria, two unusual plants have recently been discovered when a couple of hill walkers came across them, and they have got a sort of an orange flower, and the other one is red. So if people say to you, what wattles are always yellow, you can tell them differently. Moving on to the eucalypts, 2,800 species of eucalyptus or gum trees are found in Australia, found in many areas, from the silver and red snow gums of the Australian Alps into South Australia, into the Flinders Ranges. Here's a typical example of some eucalyptus here. The Blue Mountains, close to the eastern side of Australia, is home to the world's most diverse range of eucalypts. And in fact, the Blue Mountains gets its name from the blue haze that is created from these oil-bearing trees. Give you some examples here. Here is the eucalypts in bud, and they're followed by bursting into flower, and finally they end up with the seeds there. And you would know that koalas feed exclusively on certain species, not all species, but certain species of eucalypts. Moving on now to the protocoeas. Now we're talking about protocoeas here and not proteas. Now what you see in front of you there is a picture of a king protea from South Africa. To explain, proteas are members of the Protocoea family, and they're found mainly in the southern hemisphere, but proteas themselves are not actually found in Australia, but other members of the family are indeed found there, most notably the Banksia. And there's a Banksia there, so very similar looking, and you can see it's part of the family. The protocoeas are highly varied, with Banksia in particular being a striking example of what is called as an adaptive radiation in plants. This is where a plant has many variations, and for this reason it makes plant identification of species within this family sometimes very difficult to actually identify. That tree there you would not think is a member of the Banksia species, but it is. Let's have a look at some of the other species. It might come as a surprise to you that the Macadamia is a member of this family. And of course we get the macadamia nuts there, and other members of the family is the Tilopia or Waratah that I mentioned previously. A bit more detail about that in a moment. The Hakia is part of this family, and the Grevillea is also part of this family. They range in size, protocoeas, from shrubs to tall forest trees, usually of medium height. Many make excellent cut flowers, whilst the macadamia, as you know, is a fantastic commercial food crop. Cultivars, I mean, it's the nuts are grown in the rainforests of southeast Queensland, but cultivars are grown in a number of countries, most notably Hawaii and California. Native Australian flowers make the most beautiful bouquets and arrangements, as I'll show you here, particularly favoured for things like weddings. So here's a bouquet made up of all of the different members of this family. Another example there, and yet another example. And they also make lovely little arrangements for buttonholes, and there is an example there. Now going to move on to the Waratah, and it might come as a bit of a surprise to know that the Tilopia accrued the name Waratah from the SS Waratah, which was a ship, and here's an artistic impression of the ship, which plied between South Africa and Australia, and in 1909 suddenly disappeared on one of these trips. Over 200 passengers lost their lives. The ship was never been found. There's been various searches for the ship, but in the wide area of the Pacific, that's a task that's not easy to perform. And it really is Australia's Titanic. It affected the Australians greatly, and they named the Tilopia the Waratah. So let's have a look at the Waratah. It is one of Australia's most beautiful and spectacular native plants. The Tilopia species contains 5 species, confined to East Coast region from northern New South Wales to Tasmania in very restricted ranges, as I said earlier, and I'll show you this. Each of the species that I put up here has that map attached to it, and you can see that on that map that the red blob that you can see is the only place in that location where the New South Wales Waratah is found naturally. Now, this species has been in cultivation since the first years of European settlement, and the species has been developed somewhat. Here's another example of a Waratah. This is the Gibraltar Range Waratah, named after the Gibraltar Range where it exists and exists nowhere else. It's recently been split off as a separate species from the New South Wales Waratah that I've just shown you here. It flowers a month or so later than its southern cousin, so it's slightly more northerly. Gibraltar Range Waratah actually grows on sandy soils in dry, somewhat cooler climate than its southern relative, the New South Wales Waratah. The third example here is the braidwood or monga Waratah, found in cool wet forest in the Braidwood area in southern New South Wales. You can see once again very limited range where it's found. And the fourth one is the Gippsland or Victorian Waratah, found in the mountains in cool wet forests of eastern Victoria. It likes acidic soils, often alongside creek beds in wet forest or cool rainforest. Needs good drainage. It's shade tolerant, and it has been utilised quite a lot in the promotion of cultivars, most noted a Tilopia called Shady Lady, sometimes found to be white, but that is a rarity. There's a white example there. And the last of the Waratahs or Tilopias is the Tasmanian Waratah, so found over in Tasmania, central, southern and western Tasmania, and it grows on moist acidic soils in wet forests at altitudes between 600 to 1200 meters. Again, requires good drainage, also needs ample moisture for it to thrive. So out of the 5 members of the Tilopia family here, cultivars have been developed, and these are the Waratah cultivars that have been successfully grown. This one is called Fire and Ice, and I think you can see why. This one is called Shade of Pale. This one is Brimstone Blush. This is Shady Lady that I mentioned just a little while ago. This is Braidwood Brilliant. And this is the Wimbera White. Now, these are beautiful flowers. And when you think that when you get a mature tree, it grows to this size, and you don't have just 1 or 2 blooms, you have a magnificent tree full of them. So you can see why the Waratah is so much looked at by Australian gardeners. Moving on, another member of the family is the Banksias. They're a member of this Proteaceae family, as I said. About 170 species in this group. These are very popular in gardens, easily recognised by their characteristic flower spikes and fruiting cones. Banksia range in size from woody shrubs to trees up to 30 meters tall, rather like the Waratah I've just shown there. Found in a wide variety of landscapes. Some of them are arid landscapes, but never in deserts. Banksia or Coccinea, which is this scarlet Banksia that I'm showing you here, is a very desirable garden plant because of its dramatic habit and spectacular flowers. However, it readily succumbs to root rot fungus. So it doesn't do well in the cities of New South Wales and Queensland, much to the disquiet of Australian gardeners. Yes, Australian gardeners still have their problems, as we do. A lot of them try to grow Australian plants in the wrong location. Ashby's Banksia, which is the next one I'm going to show you here, is an orange Banksia. It's found in the northernmost of Australia, in sandy locations in Western Australia, particularly in sand dunes. So just shows you a lot of these members of this family do like sand in their constitution, really. It's an outstanding ornamental species, and it's ideal for cut flowers due to its bright colours. The next one I'm going to show you is known as the Hairpin Banksia, native to open forest and woodlands of the coast and mountains of New South Wales and southern Queensland into eastern Victoria, actually. It's a variable species, and not all authorities agree on the status of the various forms that exist. But three species have been accepted, with a further 2 disputed, and there are several variations in respect of the colours. And this next one is Sturtz Banksia, occurs in Western Australia, has long serrated leaves and large bright flower spikes, initially white before turning to this bright orange colour. The next one is known as the Nodding Banksia. It's a plant of the shrublands and woodlands of southwest Western Australia. Small bushy shrub, grows to about 2 metres high. It's unusual in that the flowers are pendulous, hanging on short lateral branchlets. Only 4 members of the Banksia family share this feature. All Banksia are heavily producers of nectar. So they're a vital part of the food chain in Australian bush. They're an important source for all sorts of nectarivorous animals, such as birds, bats, rats, possums, bees, and a host of invertebrates. Furthermore, they are of economic importance to Australia's nursery and cut flower industries. But these plants are threatened by a number of processes, including land clearing, frequent burning, and disease. And a number of the species are rare and getting endangered. One Banksia, Eremophilia, which I'll show you now, is a small spiky Banksia that grows to about 60 centimetres tall and has tough upright leaves and is one of the rarest plants in the world. There's only a single population of these, of about 70 plants, located on a ridge amongst heathland in a quarry reserve near a place called Canterbury, Western Australia. And I'll show you where that is there. So there's the map. You probably can't even see the dot, so I'll put an arrow there. So it's found there and found nowhere else in the world. Australian biologists have been taking trips, field trips all over the place over many years to find other plants of this species, but always it's ended in failure. So one of the world's rarest plants, and actually you know, not as beautiful as other members of the family that it shares with. The next genus of about 300 species includes the familiar bottle brush plants that you would recognize. We're going to look at those separately. The Melaleuca are part of the myrtle family, and they're known as paperbacks or barks, sorry. So that's where they normally live, close to water. They can grow up, they can be small shrubs, but grow up to about 115 feet tall. And this is why they're called paperbark. As you can see that the trunk is very papery. The bark splits back to reveal sort of sheets of paper, basically. Some have a wide distribution, others are less common, some are rare, some are endangered. The flowers generally occur in groups, forming a head or spike, resembling a brush, and that's why we call them the name that we do. And it looks like a brush used for cleaning bottles. Contains up to 80 individual flowers. Most of this is endemic to Australia. Every species is an evergreen, and the leaves vary in size from minute to up to 11 inches in length. The fruits are woody, cup-shaped, arranged in clusters along the stems, and there's an example there of the flowers. And they are, Melaleucas are important food source for insects, birds and mammals, and they also actually play a very big part in the Australian economy. What you would recognise from this family is the Callistemonium, the bottle brush. It's a genus of shrubs in the family. The entire genus is about 40, and it's endemic to Australia, but as you would appreciate, is widely cultivated in many countries throughout the world. Many of us have them in our gardens. The interesting thing is that we think about them as they're Australian. We think they don't require too much water. But as we look at them in a little bit more detail, many species actually love a lot of water and are found near water. Interestingly, biologists can't agree about the status as a separate taxon, and some people state that it is separate, whilst others say no, it's part of the Melaleucas. So it's not basically been enough proved to say that they're a separate species, but we normally talk about them individually. So let's have a look at them. What you've got in front of you there is the common red or crimson, but actually they come in all sorts of colours. Lots of whites there, is put the names up here. There's a lemon, one called River, which gives you an indication about where you'd find that. There's a desert one there, more arid condition, and there's even one there described as green. We're familiar with the red species, and I'll just put some names up for these. That's the mountain bottle brush, found New South Wales and Queensland. Don't know if any of you got this one. This is the gold-tipped bottle brush. I've seen that quite a lot in the UK. That's from northern Queensland. This one is the lesser. I always have to smile about it when I hear about the lesser. Actually, it's the largest of all of them. It grows in trees up to 20 feet tall. They are found in southwestern Australia and scattered populations in Western Australia. They're this red, rich scarlet, very beautiful flower. This one is the weeping, widely found throughout Australia and other countries. It's found in arid areas and possibly the most cultivated Melaleuca in any of the gardens in the world. Its cultivars are often grown in many different countries. This is the Wallum. It's a medium shrub, occurs in coastal areas and in New South Wales, growing in usually moist ground, actually. And the last one here is the Wimmera, which is named after the district. It is found in Victoria, grows in woodlands near rivers and streams, and it is critically endangered species. So there's very few of them in the wild at the moment. Moving on to the category of wildflowers. The wildflowers of Australia turn the arid and savanna grassland areas in Australia into an absolute amazing colour of carpet, of colour when they're in season, which is from June to September. There's more than 12,000 species of wildflower can be seen blooming across Western Australia, with more than 100 varieties of wildflowers. And I'll show you some of the pictures now. Quite staggering, really. So these arid areas and even sort of desert areas, they become this beautiful carpet of colour, erupting in masses of yellow and red, etc. Wildflowers in Australia are protected, so please don't be tempted to pick any of them. I really can't let presentation go without mentioning Kangaroo Island off of South Australia. This is Kangaroo Island here. It sits off the coast of South Australia and is Australia's third largest island. There it is there, and you can see from the map there its location in relation to the rest of Australia. It's although it's the third largest island, it's only about 150 kilometers long and about 50 kilometers wide. It covers an area about 4,500 square kilometers, separated from mainland Australia by about 12 miles of ocean. It's best known to be a zoo without fences, because the wildlife on Kangaroo Island is amazing. You will find kangaroos, naturally, sea lions, koalas, wallabies, goannas, along with tremendous amount of species of bird life. But it's famous for its annual abundance of wildflowers, particularly at the western end of the island. From late winter onwards, the heathland and forests burst into colour with tremendous amount of flowers. Over 100 species can be seen. Many of them are unique to Kangaroo Island. Kangaroo Island is has been separated from the mainland for about 10,000 years, and it's allowed many of the species to evolve and subspecies. Like the rest of Australia, Kangaroo Island actually has quite poor soil, but native plants have evolved to thrive in these, whereas non-native plants struggle to survive. So if you're going to take plants out there to Australia and live in Kangaroo Island, they will struggle. It's in the area where there's this Mediterranean climate influenced by a strong southern ocean, lots of wind. Winters are wet and cool. Summers are generally hot and dry. There's some pretty unusual plants found there. The most famous, I suppose, is the Enigma Hakia. Hakia is one of those species I talked about a bit earlier. It's a rare species, only found on the western area of the island. And there is a picture of it now. And scientists struggled with this for a long, long time because its pollen is absolutely sterile, and its means of reproduction was uncertain for a very long time. And it's now known that it spreads by sending out sucker roots alone. Sterile though it may be, it is actually still a gorgeous flower. The absence of rabbits on the island has saved a lot of these plants, I'll show you a few more of the beautiful plants that are found there. This is the common heath, the bearded heath, the climbing sundew. Now this actually catches insects, and the silver bush. So Kangaroo Island, really an amazing place to visit. Moving on very quickly now, we're going to look at the Acacias. These are perennial herbaceous plants, sometimes known as the bloodwort family. primarily a southern hemisphere family comprising more than 100 species, including the iconic kangaroo paw that I showed you earlier. 11 species of the kangaroo paw are indigenous to Australia, and there we've got several examples: the big red kangaroo paw, the green kangaroo paw, the cat's paw, and some more: the golden kangaroo paw, the bush pearl kangaroo, and the black kangaroo paw. They've got leathery leaves, and they are found mainly in Western Australia. They have fairly restricted distributions. And there's the red and green kangaroo paw and the Albany cat's paw as well. So there's the majority of the members of this family. Very unusual looking plants indeed. They have this strap-like leaves, leathery, arising from underground rhizomes, flowers occur in clusters, and the species die back in the summer when there's no moisture, and regenerate themselves in the autumn. Moving quickly on to the Eremophilia family, there's 260 species in this family, all endemic to Australia. They're spotted in semi-arid and arid regions. Eremophilia are known for their colourful shrubs, produce fleshy fruits, which are often eaten by animals and birds, so they're very important indeed. And first one here, this is just some of the examples of here. This is the Charleville turkey bush. This is the common emu bush, the twiggy emu bush. This is the silver emu bush. Well, they like their emus and turkeys, don't they? This is the slightly different one, Conissu poverty bush. And lastly, the tooth poverty bush. So we've dealt with the majority of the main flora species that you'll find in Australia. What I want to now talk about is just some of the couple of the areas where these are found and what the flora has to put up with to survive. First thing I'm going to talk about is the Simpson Desert, which is actually the desert is found in the centre of Australia here. So this is the Simpson Desert here. We've got these other deserts, but the Simpson Desert is considered to be a separate desert. It's a featureless sea of dunes where you can easily get lost. What's surprising is that they were formerly mountains as tall as the Himalayas, and they've now weathered down to this featureless desert. There's a persistent westerly wind which creates these parallel red sand dunes, which you can see in the lower picture there. There's also large and extensive salt pans found within the area. Extremely dry and hot, extremely low rainfall. When the rain falls, it brings this arid zone to life. The flora is mainly small and hardy, which adapted to these conditions. Plants have a very clever way of staying alive in these circumstances. They coat themselves with water-soluble chemicals. Only when a substantial amount of rain falls, enough to sustain them through their short but new life cycle, do the chemicals dissolve and the plants germinate. Clever, absolutely amazing. The plants will not react if it's just a shower. So somebody comes along and pours some water over them, they're not suddenly going to burst into life. They actually know when they've got sufficient water for them to go the full life cycle. The fauna is surprisingly diverse in this area. Let's have a look. First, we'll have a look at the what dominates in the way of flora here. Mainly, it's rugged terrain. So spinifex scrub dominates, along with stunted mulga trees. There's some mulga trees there. And this spinifex is so prickly, it's a deterrent to any human being or animal that comes into contact with it. It's sure to penetrate any clothing and do you a lot of damage. The mulga tree is well adapted to life in these conditions. It actually directs any water down into the core of the tree by opening the stomata for short periods, usually at sunrise before it's actually got too hot. It also produces roots that spread out incredible distance to collect as much rainwater as possible. Calculated that the mulga tree captures 200 litres of water from just 25 millimetres of rainfall that has fallen, because it's got these large water gathering roots. I talked about the fauna. You would expect there'd be these snakes, lizards, but there's also camels and lizards. There's some lizards there. There's the thorny devil. You've got emus. Sorry about that. It's my dogs. My two Pomeranians have just woken up.
I thought it was sound effects for the slides.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about that. Where was I? You've got little mammals. These are dunarts. They're narrow-footed marsupials, about the size of a European mouse, largely insectivorous. 19 species of bullfrogs are found. So they go under the ground to stay out of the heat in the dry season, and can come alive as soon as water drops. Amazing picture really to see something like this, a young plant struggling in a sand dune, but amazing with a bit of water how the desert comes to life. And you've got a darling lily here, which is a very beautiful flower. It's a plant of inland Australia. When Westerners first came to Australia, it seemed that they were everywhere. Aborigines, by the way, boil them and eat them as greens. After some rain, is a lot more darling lilies hitting the surface, and you've got other things like silver towels, which is a dense shrub, grows to about 1 metre in tall. The leaves are grow to about 4 centimetres, produces round clusters of pink-tipped flowers. The Australians love this flower called yellow billy, commonly known by the Australians as billy buttons or drumsticks. They are annual or perennial herbs, and they produce up to 200 daisy-like flowers. Another example is the potato bush or potato weed. So given a bit of moisture, the sand in the desert can start to produce. Not all plants are close to the ground. This Hakia, member of the Proteaceae family, has grown to a tall shrub, small tree size, but you can see it shows signs of the hard environment it lives in, but still produces beautiful flowers when it's given the opportunity. Last area now I'm going to look at is northern Queensland. There's a tropical climate in northern Queensland. Dry sunny season is May to October, and the rainy and muggy season is November to April. As I said earlier, the annual rainfall was 16 inches, can go to 47 inches in certain areas in downpours and thunderstorms. Around Brisbane, winter is a lot cooler than that, and it's a lot better place to live in. In the driest areas, we have savanna, but in the coastal areas where it gets a lot of rain, Cape York Peninsula, the weather is hot, and there's a lot of rain, and so rainforests have developed, and they're the oldest intact tropical lowland rainforest in the world, possessing a tremendous diversity of plants and animals. It hosts 13 of the world's 19 primitive flowering plant species. It's home to about 28% of all frogs found in Australia, 65% of ferns, 40% of birds, and 34% of mammals in Australia. So it's a very important area in those green patches that you see there. Where it's not got the rain, you get the savanna, and there's a picture of a typical interior. So that's all the interior bit there that you see. Looks like that when there's not been any rain. Okay, so what do we find in the rainforest? Well, obviously an abundance of plants here. This is a native rosella, herbaceous trailing plant. You get things like the ground orchid, the silk handkerchief. Grows on a tree, grows up to 72 feet, produces these fruity scented flowers, which is a particular attraction to marsupials and bats, which help to pollinate the tree. A couple of more unusual plants. This is the Cape York tulip wood, a rainforest tree that produces white flowers, which turn into these beautiful colours when they ripen. Another unusual rainforest species is the Jade Vine, also known as the emerald vine. Has these most beautiful jade green flowers. Might come as a bit of a surprise that Australia has a rhododendron. This is Rhododendron Lockhart. It's found in high mountains in tropical northern Queensland. Only rhododendron in Australia. It's a small shrub, clings onto cliffs by sending roots into crevices. The species has been described as growing on trees as well, so as well as on rocks. This is a flower which has an interesting name. It's the ribbonwood or idiot fruit tree. So why is it called that? Well, it bears the largest single seed of any tree in Australia. Discovered in 1902 by a German botanist, records of its existence were lost during the Second World War, and science didn't know anything about the existence of this idiot fruit tree until the 1970s, when suddenly several cows died. Yes, cows died, apparently having been poisoned. An autopsy by the farmer revealed that the cows' stomachs contained seeds from this tree. The toxicity of the seed acts quickly to kill cattle after causing spasms and then paralyzing them. It was absolutely horrific deaths for these cows. And it resulted in this major botanical discovery. The seed was identified as this idiot fruit tree or ribbon wood, and it's one of the oldest plants in the world. dates back about 110 million years. Arguably Australia's most significant botanical find ever. These huge trees hold large brown fruits and the seed is highly poisonous. And I'll show you some pictures now. First of all, the tree really it's not an unusual tree. It was easily missed. It's the sole member of this plant genus with very few close relatives anywhere in the world. And there's the flowers, quite indistinct really. And there's these seeds, which are this highly poisonous. Their only means of reproducing is to drop these seeds, and it's just gravity. They just fall down onto the ground. And it's thought that some of these seeds actually washed away in streams and rivers, and it was downstream that these poor cows fed on these seeds. So as you can imagine, if it's just gravity feeding the seeds, they don't go very far, and that's why they've stayed in that one area that I've mentioned. There are 107 orchids in Australia, not that many really. Most are unique to the country. I'll give you some examples of them. This one's quite widespread. It's the spotted sun orchid. There's one or two unusual ones here. This is the fringed helmet orchid, which is flowers a single late autumn and early winter. The plants become dormant in summer, they die back like a lot of Australian species, and they have an underground tuber. And speaking of underground, this one is the underground orchid. It pops up slightly out of the ground to display a small hidden red flower. It's a strange species for botanists. It's got a three-way relationship, which is very interesting, and I won't go into it at the moment because time is against us, but it's basically got a three-way relationship in order to make it pollinated. The orchid basically avoids emerging into harsh light of day to reproduce, so it's quite an unusual orchid for botanists. Going to finish off really by talking about Australia and its plant adaptations to fire. We were all horrified to see the range of fires that took place in Australia last year, but I couldn't present the flora of Australia without mentioning that many of its plants are specifically adapted to this fire-prone habitat. It has been like this for millions of years. And although it seems devastating, and in fact it has been, it's been around, as I say, for millions of years. And normally Australia's wildfires, actually the flora in particular is adapted to actually need fires. In a lot of cases they actually specifically need them to sprout. So if we look at the seeds of the Australian flora, lodgepole pine, eucalyptus and banksia have these cones or fruits that are completely sealed with resin. Only fires can melt the resin to release the seed. If there's no fire, the seed does not get released. Other species require chemical signs from smoke and charred plant matter to break their seed dormancy. to awaken them. And some plants, like this one here, have thermal insulation bark and fire retardant bark to protect them. But these measures will not protect them from really intense fires. Some species have specialized buds that are protected under the bark of their trunk. When the trees are burned, these buds emerge to produce new leaves and new branches. Other plants rely on underground structures for regrowth, which allows them to come back even if the above ground has been destroyed. And a lot of plants are able to take advantage of the ash-rich soil that arises after a fire. Several members of the fire lily only flower after fires have an extremely fast flowering response. One species can even reach full flowering stage in just 9 days following a fire. I couldn't let this talk really go without showing you some of these flowers and unusual trees, and I'll quick run through on them. They don't really fit anywhere else in my presentation, but I really couldn't let them go. How about this one for your garden? This is the flame tree. It's endemic to tropical and subtropical regions of the east coast of Australia. Got these famous red bell shaped flowers that often cover the whole tree when it's leafless. And there's a close-up of the flowers. How about another one for your garden? This bottle tree. Dry areas of central western Queensland and northern South Wales. Small to medium tree, so it can fit in your garden, but it does grow to 18 to 20 metres in Australia. It's got this bulbous trunk which gives rise to its name. Talking of trees, until I actually researched this, I didn't realise that Australia has baobab trees. I'd seen them many times in Africa, where there's 12 species, but there is one species found in Australia. Got this distinctive trunk. Coastal wattle, it's found in the sand dunes of Queensland. I just thought it was a most particularly beautiful flower, as I do with this one, which is the lace bark. Just love the colours of it. It's found in the rainforest of central New South Wales, southern Queensland. And the flame pea, beautiful colours there. An endemic, about 18 species, got these brightly coloured red and orange flowers. They germinate quickly after fires and provide a lot of ground cover. So that is my talk tonight. I wanted to provide you, if I've stirred your interest, I wanted to provide some links for you. The first one here, and I'm sure Indy will make these available, but the first link is a very interesting website, an Australian website that gives all the taxonomic knowledge of the country's flora. And then we've got another interesting link is Australian seed. Virtually all I've shown you tonight is available for purchasing from this company, and they do orders overseas. That's well worth a visit. And I've also, the third one there tells you about Kangaroo Island, the wildflowers. It also tells you how to get there and where to stay when you go there. So if you're interested in that. And lastly, and there is a warning that this YouTube video has got some bad language, but this here is a video of a guy in Kings Park Botanical Gardens in Perth, Western Australia. And it's just worth seeing just how dry it is, but he takes you round to some of the species that I've shown you this evening, and you can see them in all its glory. But as I say, warning, he does use quite a lot of bad language. So all I've got to say really then is thank you for listening. I'm pleased to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Glenn. That was fantastic. So folks, if you've got any questions, you can either wave the screen, use the virtual raise your hand, or use the chat box, and then we can ask Glenn. I did take a screenshot of those links that Glenn showed right at the end, and I have put it in the chat box. If anybody wants to download it from there, they can get them. Right, so I'm just going to stop the screen sharing for a second, if that's okay, Glenn.
Yeah, sure.
Brilliant, fantastic. So folks, if you've got any questions, shout out now. Glenn, I was going to ask myself, one of the plants that you showed early on, I thought was stunning, which was the orange Banksia. It's quite an unusual colour. And I did have a quick look on the internet, and I have managed to find the orange Banksia spinulosa, I think.
Yeah.
There's only one company in the UK that sells it. There's one called Birthday Candles. So I think that might go on my shopping list. It's reasonably hardy. It's a H3 according to the RHS, so it might need a bit of protection over winter, and only grows to about 0.5 metre. So I've certainly picked off one plant for today.
Excellent. Excellent.
Fantastic. So Glenn, have you actually brought any of the plants back on any of your travels? Have you done any plant hunting?
No, of course it's not allowed. But no, I haven't. But I've taken many photographs whilst, traveling. So my sort of first love is basically birds. My wife Teresa, she takes pictures of butterflies and almost takes a picture of every plant, flower that we've ever seen, So her mobile phone is full of pictures,
Yeah. Fantastic. Brilliant. Right. I think Jim's got his hand up, so he's got a question. So do you want to unmute yourself, Jim?
Hello. Kangaroo Island was one of the worst places affected by the fires last year, I believe. Have you heard anything about how it's recovering?
No, I haven't yet. But I have to say that I'd actually forgotten about that. But I did go onto the website a week or so ago, and there wasn't too much of a mention of kind of putting back their. See, as I said to you, Australia. It depends on the severity of the fires. Some of the fires that they had in Australia were devastating, but some of the fires are very necessary. So when it came to Kangaroo Island, I'm not sure of the severity of the fires there. I don't think there were too many buildings lost, unless you can tell me differently.
No, I don't know. I just recall that it was, it was a big news story, even by their, because they have fires everywhere, didn't they? But that was the one that they seemed to be featuring particularly, because it was presumably much more severe than they've had before or something.
It's an open zoo there, you see.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many animals that...
and presumably on an island, nowhere for them to escape from.
No,
really.
that's right. No.
Yeah. Oh, I just wondered if you'd heard anything about it. Thank you.
Glenn, in all your travels, is there anywhere in the UK that we can get a good view of some of the plants that you've talked about? Maybe like one of the big glass houses like Kew or Wisley or anywhere else that you'd recommend?
Well, I mean, certainly Kew's got some good collection of Australian plants there. I haven't seen anything anywhere else, I have to confess. I mean, how many of us have seen a kangaroo plant, for example? And that video I told you about with the bad language in it. Well, the guy actually, you've got all of this sort of like very dry area, and then he picks up this lovely kangaroo plant that's sort of just suddenly come out of nowhere, you know, and it's very unusual. But as I say, you know, if you can bear with it, you can get all of the seed. I mean, like you were saying about the Banksian plant that interested you, the orange one, you can probably get seed for that. It's worth having a look at. But I'm not sure how long it takes to grow from seed.
Yeah, and it probably might need a fire to make it germinate as well.
Well, I've known some people to use a sort of blowtorch on some seeds. So
yeah, interesting. There was a program on TV a couple of months ago. I think it was called Q. Oh, I've forgotten exactly what it's called. I think it was on Channel 4 or Channel 5, maybe. It was 4 episodes, I think, and they were talking about some of the seeds that they were trying to germinate.
yeah,
And they were trying to copy or mimic what happens in the natural environment. And they were doing various things like using blowtorches or using sandpaper to scrape off the other. So yeah, it was really interesting.
Hello.
Hi, Jim.
Are you listening to me? Are
Yes,
you hearing?
Yeah.
Sorry, Kirsten Bosch Botanic Garden in South Africa were selling, I don't know what they still do, were selling little sort of filter papers impregnated with smoke extract, which you soaked in water and then you soak your seeds in that water to get them to germinate. So things like restios, which wouldn't germinate at all unless they were treated that way, then come up like cress. But whether you could then get that and treat Australian seeds the same, or whether Australia does the same sort of thing, I don't know.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, it's crazy.
And in terms of getting hold of some of these things, one or two of the nurseries down in Cornwall stock some of these things because they're just about, you know, there are a few that are borderline hardy down here.
Yeah. Yeah, brilliant.
I've got Melaleuca in my garden.
Oh, yeah, fantastic. Maybe we need to visit down to your garden at some point.
You're always welcome.
Right then, folks, I think that's about it for questions then. So before I put up the final slide with the dates of the next meetings, I think we have one quick question. Hilary, do you want to unmute yourselves? Just press the button on your screen.
Thank you, Indy. I just wondered, Glenn, if one doesn't get much chance to go to Australia, but you choose to have one visit, is there a particular time of the year you would recommend to see as much as possible of these flowers in the wild?
That's a very good question.
Yeah, I mean, the wildflowers are worth going to see. The big problem about I don't know what I mean. I'll tell you my experiences. Right, when we've even been across to Holland to see the bulbs, and we booked it in advance and gone over there, only to be disappointed because the weather has not been the usual weather. Yeah, so it's, you can only take what is normal. If you want to be, the thing I would say to you is Google the area that you want to go and see. I mean, Western Australia is the best for wildflowers. Okay, so but it depends on whether they've had the rain or not. I know when I was last out in Australia that suddenly the interior had a lot of rain and suddenly everything came into bloom. But I remember them saying that was a month late. You know, so what you've got to be careful about is I would look at a particular area. If you want to look at Western Australia, then look what is the norm, the best time to go out there. But I would then narrow it down and make sure that you're not disappointed. And it's almost waiting for a last minute confirmation that the rains have arrived and that, you know, it's worth going to. Otherwise, you could waste your money. You could actually want to go and see the wildflowers and they've not arrived because of the climatic conditions. And that's the big problem with things. So my advice to you is Google it, first of all, get the months and see if they suit you, and then try to sort of be flexible enough so that you can go fairly quickly when you've confirmed that the conditions have arrived and you've got what you want to go and see. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it is quite tricky, isn't it? It's very hit and miss because the seasons do change every year. Sometimes it's early, sometimes it's late. So it is quite tricky to pinpoint the exact time. Christine, I think, do you want to ask a question, or are you just waving at the camera? Are you waving at the camera? I'm asking you to unmute. I can't hear you.
Yes. Well, my son lives in Sydney, and when you say yes, we'd love to go, but he's giving me the advice that it might not be till 2023. I was there in 2019 and previously as well a couple of times, like you said, at different times of the year. Now that the Christmas is so hot, but he's got a small garden and grows everything in pots, and quite exotic it is too. The grass though doesn't grow because it burns in the heat. But yeah, very interesting country. Beautiful. Love to go.
The interesting thing about what I've observed is that New Zealand and Australia seem to be in competition with each other for having the strictest COVID regulation.
Yes.
Anywhere in the world, and
yes.
Do you agree? Yeah, I mean, I
do. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know when actually, but they seem to be in competition with each other. Yeah.
I think because they've got a central government, and then because they're in New South Wales, they have that kind of government, don't they? You know, each state has its own rules.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all been very, very difficult. I mean, they're in 12 weeks of lockdown in Sydney, which has been, we've been through that.
They haven't had that many cases, have they?
No, not like we have here. No, not at all. No.
I mean, New Zealand had one, and they shut the country down.
Yeah. They've definitely had a much stricter policy, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. Right. I see. I just noticed a message from Robert. He's actually successfully germinated Banksia seeds, so maybe at some point next year he might be able to give us a few tips on that. But have you got a question as well, Robert?
Just chipping in. I've got a son and grandchildren in Australia. I've also been lucky enough to go over 5 times now and do some work both at Sydney Botanic Gardens and Blue Mountains.
Yes.
The thing I shouldn't say on that, back to your last point, Qantas are now saying they are going to open to international flights later this year, but New South Wales are not accepting them.
That's it. Yeah.
Interesting how it's going on internally.
It is.
And yes, New Zealand, you have to say, I think they got it right, but not in the long term. But Banksia seeds, yes, that was a little bit naughty. I did bring seeds back, but inadvertently, they were selling Banksia nuts at Mount Toma for decoration and the like.
Yes.
And you can wood turn them, and they make very interesting things to wood turn.
Right.
I brought a couple back, and in working at them, they started to rattle, and I found there were some seeds still locked inside. So, well, they were here by then, so why not? And I had 6 seeds, of which I got 5 plants from. 4 now are at least 4 years old and 1.5 meters tall in pots.
Oh, amazing.
But your point is they do, if I forget to water them, they dry out incredibly quickly and they do not come back. But they are very interesting trees at the moment.
Oh, wonderful.
Not sure how they do outside. They go into a polytunnel. One stays in the conservatory, 1 goes in the greenhouse, and 2 go in the polytunnel, just to make sure we get through.
Do you know which species they are?
No, not at all. They were not marked. They were just a big box of interesting seed pods.
Right.
Very good. Yeah. Interesting.
Fantastic, brilliant.
Well,
Right, then,
thank you
folks.
for your talk anyway.
Right then, before I just put up the
Yes.
final slide, Glenn, can I just say thank you? I think it was a thoroughly enjoyable presentation. You gave us a fantastic journey around the whole of the country, to be honest, and it is astounding actually the range of different climates that they've got as well, and the variety of plants that they are able to to grow there. Even particularly that fire retardant bark that you talked about, which was just incredible how plants have developed. But hopefully at some point when we can travel again, when things are better, hopefully we'll be able to visit and we know what to look out for now. So thank you for that. So can I ask everybody to unmute yourselves, please?
Which I am, yes.
Brilliant. And can I ask everybody to give Glenn a lovely round of applause and say thank you?
Glenn, thank you, Glenn.
Thank you.
Very much.
Glenn, really appreciate that. Right then, so folks, I'll give you the dates of the next meetings. So we have got a reps meeting, as I explained right at the beginning. So if anybody wants to find out and get involved with us to arrange talks for next year, it's on Wednesday the 29th. But the next actual talk is on Wednesday the 13th of October. And that's a talk from Vic Aspland on a brighter side of winter. Then the following week, we've got a talk from Joe Tierney, which is an afternoon talk, and he works for the National Trust. So he's giving us a talk on the life and gardens of Capability Brown. Then Thursday the 11th, we've got a talk from a guy called Doug Stuart, and he has a radio show in BBC Humberside. He's incredibly funny. I really like him, really knowledgeable. So that one we definitely want to look forward to, and that's on winter thrillers. And then we've got the Christmas quiz on the 8th of December. So make sure you get your teams together from your clubs or your whatever groups you want to, and that should hopefully be a good evening. Right, quiz answer then. So did anybody manage to figure out where it comes from?
New Zealand.
Australia.
New Zealand.
New Zealand.
Oh, New Zealand, not Australia.
We've got some clever people here. So I was going to try and confuse you because it's a Cordyline australis. So I was hoping you'd all say Australia, but
Oh, yes, I did. Yes. Oh.
but no, yes, we've got some
New
clever
Zealand.
people there. So I think I'll have to make the questions a bit harder for next time.
Indy, could I ask Indy, is this going out on YouTube?
Yes. So two things. We live stream the meetings when it happens. So if anybody doesn't want to use Zoom, they can just go to our YouTube page and they can see the talk live that evening. The other advantage of YouTube is that if you turn up late, so obviously the talk starts at 7:30. If you get back from somewhere at 8 o'clock or 8:30, on YouTube, you can start it from the beginning again. And it will usually stay there until around about 11 o'clock or midnight, whenever this meeting closes. So you watch it that way. The second option is sometimes where we record the talks like we have today, they will be available subsequently as well at a later stage. So those are the two ways it can be on YouTube. So every talk is live on there on the night. If you needed to nip off now and come back later, you could go back onto YouTube and watch the remainder of the talk there. So I hope that explains it. And the other thing is, if you've got a big smart TV in the house, you can actually watch these talks on your TV without a computer, without any other device, because you have the YouTube app on your TV. Yeah. So you can watch it in comfort on your sofa. So that's another advantage.
Can that be watched any time though? I mean, I'm just thinking that I could tell Val and Richard that look, watch this on YouTube, you see.
Yeah, so on the actual night, all the talks are available, like I say, up until 11 o'clock, and you can watch that on your TV as well if you wanted to via the YouTube app. If the talks are recorded like they are today, then yes, they will be available at a later date.
Right, so they'll be able to catch it then.
Yep. Hilary, sorry, do you want to ask something?
Do you give technical advice by Zoom, Indy, as to how to find that on your television?
Oh, yeah, it's probably slightly tricky because every TV is slightly different, but there'll usually be a button on your remote control which has all the smart functions. Then you press that and then it'll come up and it'll show you lots of different apps you can use on the TV. You just need to scroll down to the YouTube app. Usually you'll find things like the BBC.
Yes, it's on there, Luke.
Yeah.
Can you see?
Lovely, thank you.
It's on there. So I just press that button and it loads it on the television.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Right then, folks. So I will open up the breakout rooms in a moment. Oh,
I'm going now.
Juliet wants to ask a question. I'm going to open up the breakout rooms if anybody wants to
So
jump
I'm
into
going
those.
now. Thank you so much.
Yep. So I'll see you all hopefully, well, in a couple of weeks.